Welcome to the Exempt List, part of the Zero Blitz family. I'm your host, Charles McDonald, joined by my dear friend, Diante Lee of The Ringer today, newly of The Ringer. Diante, how's it been for you, man? And
Things have been great.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, number one. I mean, obviously you and I have talked a lot about this process and trying to plot out my future in sports media. So I'm glad I landed softly, leaving the athletic. And I'm excited, man. Obviously, the Ringer is a great spot to be if you are a young, growing media member. I swear I'm not going to do an ad right now for my job, but I, I really do. I've enjoyed my time there so far. Obviously, we have a lot of relationships with the people who work there already. So it's been cool to be with people that you already have some chemistry with, for sure.
Yeah, selfishly, I'm hoping that you and Stephen Ruiz do more podcasts together. That was really good. I
Yeah.
think the space needs more stuff like that. It's June. June 25th is when we're recording this. There's not a whole lot of NFL news yet still. I know it's been a theme of this podcast for like the past month. But I'm going to throw some headlines at you, and I just want you to see if any of these interest you. And if not, we can move on to what we're actually going to talk about, which is basically the chances for the defensive head coaches that were hired this year to actually have success in year one. So first, Kansas City Chiefs defensive lineman Isaiah Buggs was released following multiple arrests, including domestic violence and animal cruelty. 2, Packers hired a guy named Ed Policy to become the new president in 2025, which is functionally the owner for that franchise. 3, Panthers and David Tepper got $650 million from the city of Charlotte for stadium renovation, while Tepper will pay $150 million while being worth $18 billion. Do any of these tickle your fancy, or do you just want to move on?
Okay, so with the Isaiah Buggs thing, like the seriousness of some of the case, like you do want, I don't want to just pay no mind to it and just joke about it. I did get a good chuckle out of that whole hookah bar conspiracy that I think he floated out there, that's the city of Tuscaloosa is after an Alabama grad and NFL player for his hookah bar, apparently. I don't know if that one really passes the smell test for me, so I definitely got a good little chuckle out of that. When I think the real truth is that you just can't get right. And then with the David Tepper thing, this is funny. I was talking to a friend of mine that I went to high school with yesterday who's a major Chargers fan, right? And as a San Diego native, the thing that we always just talk about is how frustrating it is that these billionaires get to ask their cities to subsidize their
Oh my God.
business, working in these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, right? And this has obviously been something that's been going on with the Panthers for a while. The stadium, the facility, I know that they've been leaning on South Carolina a lot to pay for some of the things that they wanted to get developed. So I'm not surprised to see this. It's very venture capital to ask the public to subsidize, so that way you can just sit on your billions of dollars. It's more annoying, I think, than a major story, but still annoying nonetheless.
One of the funny parts of the Tepper and getting money for renovations was a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, the Charlotte Observer put out a article where they said most people were actually fine with the idea of giving them money to renovate the stadium. They just didn't want to give money to David Tepper specifically.
Okay.
Like your average Charlottean. Yeah, okay, look, the Panthers, we could probably use a new stadium, but not for this guy.
Not you. Panthers, yes. You, no. Okay, David Tepper, total aside on David Tepper. I just need to know from a friend, what is your policy on people touching hats? Because when I saw that clip a few months ago with David Tepper walking into the restaurant and taking the guy's Eagles hat off his head, like I had like an audible gasp. I don't know if this is like a California thing where touching a hat is like grounds for fisticuffs. But I needed to know from somebody who is a Carolinian, what your take is on somebody touching hats.
That's, to me, that was like a Two Americas moment more so than anything. Because, bro, I've seen people fight over that. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
You knock my hat off my head, there might be fighting. There might be something worse than fighting, depending on where you're at.
That's what I'm saying.
That was pretty bad. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, I've seen worse happen to people who accidentally step on shoes. I'm not even talking about like Jordans or expensive designer shoes. Somebody's Chucks have been stepped on and it's turned into an issue. The idea of you invading my space and touching my hat, I think that speaks a lot to why if you live in Charlotte, you probably say anybody can get this money but you, my friend. If
Yeah.
I got to do it
And
for the Panthers, I'll eat it for the Panthers. I do not want you to feel any level of happiness for this.
yeah, hopefully they get it turned around because the vibes are bad. It also just feels crazy to me, like asking for this money when you have ran that team into the ground over the past couple of years.
Right.
The audacity is it's a bit much to me.
After you've already demonstrated that you're willing, you clearly have no problem paying coach buyouts. You're sitting on plenty of fluid cash to pay for anything else. But I guess when it comes to improving the facilities for your actual organization, that's where we get tight pocketed. It's an interesting approach to public relations.
Yeah. And the Packers thing, Ed Policy, is just a funny name. That's all I had on that, really.
Hilarious
Like,
name.
You sound like you should be
very much support for kicking old people out, so that way you can bring more old people in that are not as old as the guy that you're showing the door.
Yeah. Well, at least you got a quarterback. That makes things a lot easier moving forward. Jordan Love is as good as he was last season. But let's move on to what we actually wanted to talk about today, which is defense. Diante is one of the best defensive minds that I've talked to, like including like NFL coaches too. So I wanted to get his thoughts really on what has been kind of an abnormal year from a hiring practice as far as NFL coaches go. There were 8 head coaches hired this year. 5 of them have backgrounds as defensive coaches, from positional coaches through defensive coordinators last season. And I just kind of wanted to take the temperature really on how reasonable is it to expect some of these guys to have success in year one, and kind of what the pitfalls are for them. So let's start off with a guy who has been a head coach before for my beloved Atlanta Falcons, Dan Quinn, who is now the head coach for the Washington Commanders. Obviously, this hire was interesting because Dan Quinn was not their first choice.
Right.
Like, well documented that Dan Quinn was not the first choice. They wanted Ben Johnson. They had that weird public spat with Ben Johnson that lasted like the entire month of January. After they had even hired Dan Quinn, it was still kind of going on. But now he gets to the reins here and is tasked with kind of rebuilding a Washington defense that sold off some pieces last year by trading Chase Young and Montez Sweat. So is he cut out for this? Because that's where I start to wonder with Dan Quinn. Because obviously, you have the tenure as a defensive coordinator of the Seahawks with the Legion of Boom. You go to Atlanta. The defense was horrendous all 5 years he was there. The 1 year that they were decent on defense was 2017. And they were really bad down to down, but I think they were the best red zone defense in the league that year. So, you're just kind of bend, don't break. But every defense other than that was just straight up Swiss cheese. Then you go to Dallas, right? And the production was a lot better in Dallas. But when you got into these games against some of the top minds, you're still getting diced up and giving up, 30, 40 points. And now he's in Washington, where doesn't have a Micah Parsons and needs to kind of figure out what's next for him. Like, what do you feel is really on the table for the Commanders this year on defense?
Well, to me, when you look at the depth chart, you don't really see anything that exemplifies a Dan Quinn defense. And that's the first concern for me, is all of Washington's strength is up the spine of that defensive line. And he's not a defensive tackles first guy, which is interesting to me. I think that Jonathan Allen can be really productive for him, right? I think that he can play well in that scheme. I think Deron Payne is always going to be productive. I think that pair you should feel pretty good about. But when I look at Dante Fowler and Dorrance Armstrong as your starting edges, that doesn't cut it in a defense that asks guys to just pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. Right? Knowing that they're probably going to give up big plays in the run game, because that's just always been a thing with Dan Quinn. You know that they're going to play with lighter bodies, because that's always been a thing with Dan Quinn. And they're going to play a ton of man. And then when you look at the fact that they don't have a good pass rush, at least by depth chart, and you look at all the youth they have at corner and guys who are kind of unproven, that's where I really get concerned. Where it's like, I understand that he wasn't their first choice. I know that he's kind of being brought in right now to maybe do some more power washing of Washington's reputation and be an adult in the room to kind of guide them through this. I don't see how this defense is productive in year one. And I don't know if there's an easy 2 to 3 year track where you can look up the way that he did in Dallas and say, all right, you got Micah Parsons. quit on the linebacker project thing, made him an edge rusher, and now he's a top tier player. You kind of rein in Trevon Diggs's risk taking, and now he looks like a real number one corner. I don't know if any of that exists on the roster. And then you got to look at the fact that you've got Bobby Wagner playing middle linebacker, which is like really, really concerning to me after having watched him in Seattle. Jamin Davis hasn't proven himself to be anything yet. I don't know if there's much to feel confident about with Washington defensively.
Yeah, and they have like this. I would say they have like weird edge depth because I think you probably have to throw Frankie Louvu in that mix.
Yeah, Frankie Louvu will probably be his Micah Parsons, quote unquote.
Yeah, because Frankie, he's kind of like jack of all trades, don't quite have a real position, but hey, I can get up the field and finish a play, which is kind of what Dan Quinn only wants from the edges for the most part. But I do think his transition, like if he's going to wind up being a full-time edge in that defense, I think that's going to be an interesting transition for him. Because I remember when I think it was the 2017 season or the 2018 season in Atlanta when Devondre Campbell ended up being like a 50% like edge rusher, and like, oh man, like this is we're
in dark times, baby.
We've kind of lost the plot here. And we might need to invest in that. But it'll be interesting to me, I think, to see how the secondary shapes out too. Emmanuel Forbes, man, the picture that went viral. I think it was a couple weeks ago where he's standing next to a high schooler and people thought that he was a high schooler because he's so small. I don't really know how that's supposed to fit in Dan Quinn's defense. Like if you're going to be playing like a bunch of press, dude, you're 160 pounds. Just
I mean, everybody remembers what it looked like when he was guarding AJ Brown last year. Like that was not, he did not have any fun with that matchup at all. And now you're going to be playing more man and more press in this defense.
Yeah, it just seems to me like on the defensive side of the ball, I don't know if I trust Dan Quinn as like a schemer or, a play caller to actually give his team the edge. Because, dude, like you go back and you watch some of the worst performances that his defenses have had from Atlanta to Dallas. Dude, like even just crossers, like they just can't do anything to him. And it's like, man, like a lot of teams have figured out how to defend some of this stuff, and you're still getting beat by, some basic concepts. So I think it'll be interesting to see their matchups with like Kellen Moore in Philly, see if Brian Dable can get some off on them, because I just don't really see where the edge is supposed to come from on defense outside of just saying, hey, we got Deron Payne, John Allen. If those guys can crack heads enough, we might have something respectable on defense.
And I still just don't know if that's enough. And I think the point you just made is the one that sticks out most to me with Dan Quinn, which is that he loses the same way all the time. And that's the most concerning thing. And then you look at the personnel on this defense, and it's like tailor-made to continue to lose the same way that Dan Quinn's defenses have been taken advantage of over the last decade now.
Yeah. So good luck, Washington. At least you get to see how many points Jaden Daniels can score immediately. That's fun.
Jeez, man. Their share of skinny players in key positions. It's concerning. It's concerning. You want to talk about an all-time not getting off the bus team.
Dude, I really do think this Bobby Wagner stuff is fascinating, because how are we still here? Like, because the thing that blows my mind is people will go, oh man, he had 180 tackles. Why do you think he had 180 tackles? Because he's the mark. He's the mark.
Yeah. There is a certain threshold where it's like it goes from being productive to being indicative of a problem. Like I don't know if I want any guy to be around the ball that often. That means that they're always sending the ball your way.
Dude, I tell people, just go back and watch that first Rams Seahawks games from last year. And Stafford and Puka are just sitting back and just throwing dagger over and over again right behind Bobby's head. So I don't know. Maybe this is the coach you need to get with to drink from the fountain of youth, but I think it's going to be tough sledding for Dan Quinn and the Commanders. Let's move on to his previous team, the Falcons, who hired Rams defensive coordinator Raheem Morris last year. This is pretty interesting for reasons that because I feel like Raheem's just kind of this guy. He's had his hand in a little bit of everything over the past 20 years of coaching in the NFL. But defense is the main thing that he spent his time on, including being the Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator for the Rams a couple years ago. So now he takes over a Falcons defense that, like, the more I kind of went back and thought about the Falcons defense last year, the more I became very concerned about what's going to happen to them this year, because they had a strong run defense, until Grady Jarrett got hurt. Yeah. Ryan Nielsen was I thought he was a good schemer because they needed the blitzes because they weren't really getting home from the edge. And then it's just kind of like AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates putting out an endless number of fires. And then Clark Phillips came on nice at the end of the year. I will say that. But am I wrong to think that this is about to be just a horrible year on defense for the Falcons now that Nielsen's gone and they've replaced him with Jimmy Lake?
See, and that's the thing is the Nielsen thing worked because he blitzed. That was the point you made. I don't think that this is a defensive scheme that's really built on blitzing to solve problems, which is what I think they're going to have to do is heat quarterbacks up. I think that, there was a point in time where, and I know you've pointed this out, this is something I've talked about with Mina Kimes on her show before. This team has been skating on not having real pass rush for basically 8 years now. At some point,
more than 8.
We're talking since John Abraham retired, basically, and at some point that bill really comes due. And I think Grady has done so much to paper over some of the problems that this defensive front has had. And then you start looking at the depth chart now, and it's I don't know if there's even enough baseline talent around Grady Jarrett, to maximize him as a player and for him to turn around and maximize the guys around him. It's concerning. It's concerning. I think that we're going to see a lot of soft zone from Raheem. Raheem's influence is a little bit more of the soft zone. And then you have Jimmy Lake, who wants to play more kind of base rush, man coverage. And if they're just going to be a cover one and soft quarters team, they are lining themselves up to just get cut up and down the field. Because they're not going to get enough backfield production, I don't think, to be impactful on a down and down basis.
Yeah, this is, I think, when you start bringing in the Falcons defense, this is where you see the impact of the Penix pick. We're whew.
They had so many opportunities, dude.
So many opportunities.
So many different things with this.
And they quietly have a lot of holes on defense, for a defense that, according to Ben Baldwin's site, rbsdm.com, they were 5th in success rate last year. But if you go to DVOA, they were 24th in DVOA last year. Because, even by the end of the year, the Saints put up 40 on them. They were not a good defensive team by the end of the year. And you didn't really add to that. I know they tried to get Danielle Hunter. Obviously, why would you do that when you could go play with Will Anderson in Houston and D'Amico Ryans? So I know they have a problem on the edge, but they didn't really address it outside of drafting Braylon Trice. So
which I don't think addresses the problem as much as just adds a body for now. Yeah. And then, in the second round, you have a chance to maybe go add something else to the defensive interior. I don't know how long the track is going to be for Rucororo, but whatever that timeline is going to be, it's not instant impact, there's just so many questions about the approach to this offseason and how they wanted to actually improve this roster, and the money they spent on a quarterback to go out and draft another quarterback, to not go get another edge rusher, to not bring in another DB. Because for as much as I like Clark Phillips, who you pointed out, I was really expecting them to leave this offseason with another outside corner. So that way Clark could play more inside, especially in Jimmy Lake's defense, knowing that he wants to use as many DBs as possible, or at least that's what we know from his time as a defensive play caller at the University of Washington, right? And we know that Raheem is willing to play whatever personnel package is necessary to match up to offenses. I thought that they might have put a little bit more premium on Clark playing on the inside, where his size is not going to be as big of an issue in terms of matching up with wide receivers. So I don't even know what this thing is going to look like by the time we get to week one.
That's what I've been thinking with the Falcons defense. I don't even know how they plan on doing this, because it's like you said, it's not like Raheem has had one style of defense that he's coached over his career.
Right.
He's done everything. Right. Even when he was the interim coach for the Falcons when they fired Dan Quinn, he put his own little twist on it, but it was still mostly Dan Quinn stuff. I mean, you can't it's hard to change playbooks in like week 10, right? So,
well, and with Los Angeles, right, he got hired and they basically handed him a playbook and was like, hey, this is the language. This is what worked for us a few years ago. This is what we want to continue. I just want you to maximize it. So yeah, like you said, it's not like you can just stamp this the way you could like Brian Flores, right? And it's like, all right, I know exactly what this defense is going to look like. And now it's just going to be a matter of whether or not we have enough bodies at one or two key positions to match up with teams. With this team, I don't know where the matchups are. I don't know how you mitigate the problems outside of just asking AJ Terrell to be an all-pro again and asking Jesse Bates to be a transformational safety, both of whom are capable. I just don't know, even if they're absolutely at their peak, if there's enough around those two and Grady Jarrett to make for more than maybe a just below average defense at best.
Yeah.
And I mean, Grady, of this thing going worse is probably much higher than that.
Grady's, this is year 10. It's coming off a torn ACL. So you never know.
That cliff comes, man. That cliff comes fast. And I love watching the dude, so I don't want to put that on him. But, you know, like you said, a torn ACL and the workload that they have put on this dude has been significant for his entire career.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is crazy because I can really only think of like one down year that Grady had. It was the first year with Arthur Smith and Dean Pease. He kind of got his ass kicked a little bit. But outside of that, man, he's been a great pick. Ring of Honor member. I hope he's back. But this Falcons team feels like this feels like early 2010s Falcons, where you got the quarterback, you got some weapons, you got a couple playmakers on defense, and nothing else,
and not a whole lot else. Not a whole lot else. That's for sure.
Should be fun. Should be fun at least. Next coach.
Yeah, fun has a lot of definitions, doesn't it?
You're telling me. Should be fun to watch at least. Like I just want to see some points scored. Next coach, Jerod Mayo, Patriots. I feel like this one's pretty straightforward. Like I think their defense should be pretty good. Yeah, I mean he's already certified on that side of the ball in terms of being a play caller and being able to put the defense together. Now it's just like, how does this look when you have to be in charge of the whole thing? But like on defense, I wouldn't really be concerned about this at all.
I mean, they don't have to change a thing, right? That's a nice thing about hiring from within. So, you know, there's going to be some schematic carryover, and then they didn't lose many key role players on the defensive side of the ball. And the way that they like to play, it's not going to take much change between whatever Jerod Mayo wants to do in terms of maybe modernizing Belichick's scheme based on the bodies that they already have in the door. Like, I feel probably most confident of the new defensive hires that they're going to be able to replicate what was already in place. And that doesn't even, you know, mention the fact that they may have a healthy Christian Gonzalez all year. And what it looked like right before he got hurt was that pick was going to be a major hit. You know, so I think that you should probably, if you're a Patriots fan, the only thing you need to be concerned about is whether or not Drake May can, you know, speed up his own timeline, take over the starting job before the end of the season to give you some feeling that going into 2025, you might be able to compete in the AFC East again.
Well, what I'm about to say sounds like messed up and crazy, but at least with Christian Gonzalez, it was only a shoulder injury. So like he should still be able to run, you know? Right. Man, I kind of forgot about that. They were going to get him back. That's a big piece. According to Sports Info, they do have some depth. According to Sports Info Solutions, last year, Patriots, they had the best run defense in the NFL by EPA per play and the 14th best pass defense. So they're going to get a boost with Christian Gonzalez. I'm excited for Jerod, man. I'm glad they made the May pick. Like you're giving yourself a chance at a really high upside quarterback. I'm excited for him. Let's get on to Antonio Pierce for the Raiders, who already had a hand in the Raiders turnaround last year because he was named the interim for the last 9 games of the season after they fired Josh McDaniels. This is kind of interesting, like, or where the Raiders defense is, because last year this is according to Ben Baldwin's runningbacks.don't matter.com, where you can find his stats. Terrible website name, but useful resource. So the Raiders went from 26th in EPA per play to 2nd in EPA per play on defense from the time that Antonio Pierce was in charge over the last 9 weeks of the season. But it comes with a bit of a caveat, I gotta say. Once I started like thumbing back through who they played, like the quarterbacks the quarterbacks they played in that span were Tommy DeVito, Zach Wilson, Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins, Ethan Stick, Gardner Minshew, and Jarrett Stidham. They did have a game against the Chiefs where they slowed down the Chiefs in Arrowhead, and they also played a game against the Dolphins in Miami where they held the Dolphins to 20 points, which, as we know, was a pretty impressive feat based on what they were doing last year. So where are we on the Raiders defense, and how do we feel about Antonio Pierce just as a head man in general?
So the thing with me was Vegas, I guess I've just kind of accepted that this year doesn't have to matter. So I'm probably just going to be watching them for Max Crosby vibes, right? And just taking whatever we get. I am interested to see what Christian Wilkins looks like alongside Max Crosby. Like, they are going to be the all-effort team up front.
Yes.
You know, they are probably going to be, if there are going to be fights between offensive linemen and defensive linemen, I think that the Raiders will probably be the ones initiating more fights with just annoying levels of effort and motor, trying to get after the quarterback and create plays in the backfield and being great run defenders. I don't know if I have high hopes as much as I just think they have a lot of interesting pieces kind of spread around, you know, their defense. I've always liked Jerod Mayo when he's healthy. Obviously a speed guy. You can play in center field. I think that having him allows them to load up the box a little bit more, which I think helps all their linebackers because they don't really have any one guy at that spot that stands out. And that allows Max Crosby to really tear off up the field, which has just been such... That's probably been the most underrated part of his game. I don't know if we can say underrated anymore because people like me and you and Nate Tice, you know, we make it a point to try to point out what he is as a run defender. But I still think it probably goes underappreciated by the casual fan, just how much he affects the game as an edge rusher, as a run defender, by creating plays in the backfield. So if they're able to continue to get that out of Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins is still what he was like the last 2 or 3 years in Miami, and maybe you get something out of Tyree Wilson as like a move around piece, then we might really be working with something going forward. I'm trying not to put too many expectations on them just as a franchise because I know that so much is in flux and they've kind of got to flush some of the things that have gone wrong over the McDaniels tenure, probably over both this season and next offseason.
Yeah, I am fascinated to watch Wilkins and Crosby, one because they're good, and two because this is Iron Man right here.
Yeah,
neither player has missed a game since the 2020 season.
They don't even take snaps off.
Yeah, so the past two seasons for Christian Wilkins, in 2022 he played 84% of the defensive snaps. Last season he played 81% of defensive snaps, and then Max Crosby is on some other where. The last 2 seasons, 2022, he played 96% of the defensive snaps. Last season, he played 95% of the defensive snaps, which is just like kind of unheard of.
That's unheard of.
Unheard of for a defensive lineman. So, dude, if those guys are going to carry the load, this has to be the year for Tyree Wilson to figure something out, man. I just feel like it has to be because your opportunity is not going to get much better than this. You've got 2 of the best defensive linemen in the NFL who are going to play a bunch of snaps and be very disruptive across the field. All you got to do is just kind of show the talent that we know you have. And maybe it's not over for him. Maybe he just needed a little mulligan year after year 1.
I mean, and I think, I know that you were probably the first guy I heard really be high on him, but even in the conversations that we were having about him as a prospect when he was being drafted there are clearly some things that needed to be worked on. It was just a matter of whether or not his athletic gifts were going to help him kind of fast track that process. Now that we know that he maybe needed a little bit more time, I'm not sweating what last year was so much. I'm really excited to see, again, like because Wilkins is there, because you have Max Crosby, I think that they can maybe focus on a role for him where he can just be another guy that wrecks shop. You don't have to ask him to be super productive as a pure pass rusher, and you get in those third down situations, you can start moving bodies around and really creating situations where Max Crosby is getting one-on-ones and you can have Wilson and Wilkins working some kind of stunt or game to mess with offensive linemen. So I'm really fascinated to see, what they can do with this front four around Crosby and Wilkins.
Yeah, it's got to happen at some point. They got to have a good defense. I think last year was a little fake money, but they do have some pieces. I just kind of wish they had a corner to kind of level this out, but it's kind of hard to pass on Brock Bowers at 13, even when you have Michael Mayer already. Like that's how good Brock is. The last defensive coach that was hired, Mike McDonald from the Seahawks. I think this is. He just had such a full cupboard in Baltimore that I mean, obviously he doesn't quite have in in Seattle, but he was so good last year and the year before that even with a defense that was the worst rush defense in the league, the Seahawks were one of 3 teams last year to give up positive EPA per rush attempt, which is, if you studied like analytics, it's really difficult to have positive EPA on run plays.
Yeah.
So if you're giving that up on defense, like every carry, you're getting steamrolled.
Right.
And like you make it to the point where teams, they don't have to actually be, they don't have to put the ball in the air. If you don't have to put the ball in the air, that's like the most purest form of football. You're just going to get trampled. But what's interesting is like they did spend, right? They spent on Draymond Jones. They spent the 5th pick on, spent the 5th pick on Devon Witherspoon last year. Where can the improvements come from at McDonald? And is it like reasonable for this, for Seahawks fans and really everyone else to expect this defense to kind of take off this season? Because that's all they're missing. You know, as much flack as Geno Smith gets from certain people, he's playing with one of the worst defenses in football last year.
I mean, for sure. I think, well, that's what's going to be interesting to me about watching this defense in comparison to Baltimore last year, is that this defense clearly doesn't have like the linebacker talent that he had in Baltimore. And that definitely allowed them to do some different things in terms of zone coverage, in terms of creating pressures, creatively moving guys around. But one thing that Seattle does have is depth on the back end. So I'm really fascinated to see if he changes gears and maybe plays a little bit more predictable up front and just uses guys like Devon Witherspoon to blitz, play in the slot. Maybe you get more out of Tariq Woolen. He looks closer to maybe what he was when he got really hot as a rookie than what it was maybe last year. And that's not to say that he was a bad player, you know, when he was out there. It's just a matter of, I think, balancing out his level of play because he does have so many tools, getting the most out of Mike Jackson again, and using that combination of safeties of Julian Love and Rayshon Jenkins to maybe take away throws in the intermediate area of the field. I'm fascinated to see what it looks like from a coverage perspective, because to your point, I mean, they don't have a lot of edge rush. They did spend on the defensive interior, which I think is a signal as to what Mike Macdonald really values in building the defense, is having guys that play, you know, those 4 eyes, those 3 techniques, guys who can play the nose and create, you know, up the spine of the defense and kind of playing everything else off of that. So I think if Draymond Jones is the player that he was in Denver when he was at his best, if Big Cat Leonard Williams can still give you something as a pass rusher and run defender, then I think that they can be probably about average, you know, without having high level pass rush. And I think it maybe just try to cheat by. And if they're like a 9-8 team, you probably count that as a success, and they're competitive enough to go toe to toe with San Francisco, maybe 1 out of their 2 games, go toe to toe with the Los Angeles, maybe 1 out of their 2 games, and you tread around 500. You probably say it's a success no matter what.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And it's just like, man, if you can just get to like the 20th, 18th best defense, which I think is on the table for them. I mean, they still have some pieces.
They have some pieces, yeah.
Like
I mean, Delosu was always going to be productive as a run defender, high effort guy. They have to get something out of Boye Mafe and Derek Hall as 2nd-round picks, because they've taken so many swings at that edge rusher position in the top 100. Something's got to shake out there. And that, I think, is really what's going to mark how successful they can be, where their ceiling is as a defense, is if some of those young guys up front can give them something.
Yeah, I don't know if they can like win the NFC West, but I think they have enough on the roster to get back to the playoffs. Like the whole thing, not just the defense, but you look at offense and like the offensive line, they still have potential, even if it hasn't quite materialized yet. So, man, I just think they're close. I want to see how they split up Byron Murphy and Draymond Jones snaps, because for a defense like Mike's, it feels a little redundant, just a smidge, but at the same time, like you gotta play with the hand you're dealt with, and at least you could see a world where those 2 guys can be like an interior like pressure package, right? Where maybe those guys can get upfield a bit, even if they're not stopping the run like you would hope. But I think they probably need a pretty big year from Byron Murphy, like right off the gate.
Right now, for sure.
How do you feel about Murphy in this defense, just in general?
I loved the pick I think that, well, it again, like you take certain picks or certain pickups in free agencies as signals from coaches and GMs as to where their priorities lie. And I think that picking Byron Murphy, I think, spoke a lot to how Mike McDonald viewed Matabike's role in his defense in Baltimore, and needing to get and wanting to get a guy who can be a game changer on the interior that you can't block one-on-one, a guy who grew, Byron Murphy grew a bunch as a run defender throughout his career at Texas. And by that last year, I mean, there was just nothing the Big 12 teams could do with him. So I think if you can get that level of play out of that guy, it really does cover for the fact that your inside backer rotation is Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, which is probably not the most inspiring thing in the world. And if he can give you something as an interior pass rusher, that takes some of the pressure off of Boye Mafe and Derek Hall to hit right now, So I do think he has to give an impact right away if they're going to hit their ceiling as a defense in that kind of 16 to 20 range, like you said.
Yeah, good luck. Rams are coming. 49ers
yeah,
are still
Rams,
good.
Niners, you got to see those guys 4 times.
Cardinals got Marv.
Yeah.
I posted like in our group chat yesterday, but there was a re-mock draft from like I think the 33rd team that had Tariq Woolen going 9th overall. Like, and it's like, I don't know, man.
Yeah,
because I remember at his rookie year, there were Seahawks fans that were mad that Sauce won Rookie of the Year over him. I'm like, guys, they're not the same.
Yeah, they're not the same player at all. Not at all.
You're just looking at interceptions,
dude. You're not. You're not getting it.
Yeah, these are not the same. Not the same thing
at all. But I think there's something there with Devin Witherspoon. Like that will be the one guy that I think could be a game changer for them. Even though he's not Kyle Hamilton in terms of versatility, he can maybe be I guess a diet version of what Marlon Humphrey is. Who can play inside or out, be a blitzer, fit the run, play physically. That's kind of Devin Witherspoon's wholesale switch.
That was fun watching him do that his rookie year, because when I watched him at Illinois, I thought he was just going to like stick on the outside, like a little feisty outside corner, but they saw the vision to kind of expand that. And he did more at the NFL level his rookie year than I thought he would be able to do at that size. So I'm really interested to see what Mike has plans for him. I would imagine Tariq is just going to be planted as one of the outside corners. Don't ask him to do anything else. And then we'll see how the rest of the defense plays out. Because I think they have just enough juice to at least not be like one of the worst run defenses you've seen over the past few years. Like when you're getting trampled by Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, something's got to change. Something's got to change. That's enough football. We are going to get to Kendrick Lamar, the Ken and Friends concert, everything beef related after a word from our sponsors. All right, we are back. Hope you enjoy the football talk for the first 40 minutes, because it's time to talk about everyone's true favorite sport, the current American pastime. Real ball. Real ball, where Kendrick Lamar has just won the Super Bowl. And for real, like last week, for those of you who have been either just don't listen to rap music or have been living under a rock for the past like 2 months, there's been a big back and forth between Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole and Rick Ross and Drake. But really, the two main guys were Kendrick and Drake. I know Kanye West tried to get in there for a second. Everyone's like, nope.
I've never seen a superstar get like kicked to the curb so quickly. Nobody even acknowledges.
Dude, I still haven't even heard the song. I still have not heard the song.
You haven't missed anything. I will tell you that.
Yeah. I'm going to keep it that way.
Yeah.
But, we had basically the week-long beef, which I think is really funny, because if you look back at like old beef from the 90s, these things did not last 1 week. Like you might have to wait months before you hear the actual, comebacks diss. But it culminated in Kendrick getting the superstar hit, Not Like Us, which has galvanized the country against one man. One man. Not and look, I know this is largely an LA thing. Yeah. But dude, they're playing out parties here in New York. This is nationwide hate, baby.
So that's the first thing I wanted to touch on, right? Like, I'm sure if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen me tweeting about this nonstop for like the last 2 months. Being at the Ringer, like I was up at the office yesterday in Los Angeles, and like Chris Ryan and some of the other guys were saying what's up to me and asking me about it, and why I was just so juiced up about this whole thing. I'm like, dude, I don't know if there's ever been a time in music that I can look back upon where like a fan base all kind of made their pick a decade ago, well, more than a decade ago, almost 15 years ago now, on who their guy is. Like, could you imagine sitting on that ticket and then it finally cashes in? Like, I wanted
so
this for so long. I wanted this for so long, and it played out exactly the way that I thought it might. So yeah, dude, this is like an endless victory lap for me personally. I don't even know how Kendrick feels about it. I can say for me as a fan, this is probably as good as it's ever felt to be a fan of rap.
Yeah, because dude, I remember back, man, we're dating ourselves here. Like,
it's all right, we're in our 30s now.
2011, 2012, 2013, you know, people would be comparing Kendrick, J. Cole, Drake. I was like, no, man, those other guys are not the same as this. Yeah. This is not the same. So, you know, there's been, they've thrown shots at each other. I think Kendrick has been a little more bold with the shots he's thrown over the past like decade, but like the BET cypher, when he drops Nothing Was the Same, soft rapper with pajama clothes, you know, obviously he's talking about Drake. You have the Control verse, and then the first person shooter song that J. Cole dropped with Drake, which they had apparently asked Kendrick to be a feature on, disgusted him to his core, to the point where he drops you guys, this is the nerve. The nerve of you guys to think that we're all supposed to be on the same song together. So he drops the Like That verse, and then Rick Ross gets involved, blah, blah, blah. Drake does push-ups, and then it just escalates from there. And like when Kendrick dropped Euphoria, I was like, oh, he's in his bag.
We're here. Yeah.
We're here. We're here. We're here.
Yeah.
And I always thought that the angle, besides, you know, the messing with kids stuff.
Yeah, we'll leave the biggest stuff for that's another conversation for another
conversation. But just kind of like galvanizing this is like, you are an outsider to all of this culture, even people that you thought were your boys. YG, he's in the Not Like Us music video. You got the Atlanta rappers getting called out for, you know, at the end of Not Like Us. I'm sure he thought those boys were his friends too. And it's just been interesting to see the fallout for Drake from this, where really his fans are kind of acting a little delusional about this, where, you know, I've seen people say that Migos wouldn't have fans if it wasn't for Drake. I'm like, hold on, player. Hold on. We were on this Migos thing before Versace. I can promise you that, especially down south. we were on this Migos thing before Versace. Yeah, it's just been fascinating to see like what people cling to, and really just like how hard the fandom has turned out for like grown men. You know, you've seen grown men having meltdowns about Drake for the past couple months. But I'm like, dude, it is what it is. Your guy's seen as an outsider. I'm sorry, I don't know what to say to you.
This is the thing. Again, leaving the rumors and biggest allegations to the side, the thing that struck me, for as much as I thought that Kendrick would win this battle, I never imagined it would play out in the way it did, because there were so many moments where Drake kind of leaned into all the things that Kendrick was leveling against this guy. Like, I've never seen somebody go out of his way to not beat the culture vulture allegations. There were so many moments, whether it's the Rick Ross disc comes out and then he puts up the Instagram post of him texting his mom, which I don't believe was a real back and forth. But I was like, dude, this looks very petulant white boyish. I don't think that that's helping you in this conversation. You get the end of Euphoria, right? You get the singing at the end of Euphoria. And then you open up Family Matters right after that with more petulant white boy sounding-ish. I said it and I know that you're mad. I'm like, yeah, brother. You're not helping yourself here.
the free the slaves line? I'm like, what are you doing?
I'm like, dog? What are we doing? What are we doing? I tweeted this last night in response to Dragonfly Jones, who made the great point that in beefs you often see people take angles using information that would hurt them if it were leveled against them, right? And I think so much of what Drake's angle was against Kendrick was, oh, you're not to your community and to your culture what you think you are. And like you said with YG, first of all, the idea of playing in the LA politics, which is not Drake's thing, it's not anybody's thing if you're not from there. I knew immediately that was going to backfire. And then you have that layered on top of the Pac thing. Like, you're throwing your opponent an alley-oop, and you got windmill dunked on with that. There's just so many things angles-wise that just didn't work for Drake. You bring in the third parties again with the dude's business partner and his fiance. I'm like, I don't think that's going to land the way you think it's going to land, because these are very private people and people who are fans of your opponent in this that are really invested know who these people are and the place that they have in Kendrick's career and his livelihood. I don't think that that's going to land with people. And you saw that it didn't. And I think that what you've seen over time now is, as the heat of the moment is kind of dissipated and you kind of get a chance to look at everything from a 30,000 foot view, you see just how much flailing I think was coming from Drake's side. And I think that's reflected in how the fans are behaving. So there's all of that. But at its core, and I know that we've talked back and forth about this, and I was listening to Euphoria on the drive over here, like, it's just so clear that lyrically, one guy can do one thing that the other guy cannot.
Right.
Like, if you're just evaluating the lyrics, the quality of rapping, like, Euphoria is a masterpiece lyrically. There's nothing you can do with that. And I think that's where it became clear, like, okay, if Kendrick is taking this serious now, there's nothing that this dude can do musically that's going to win him this back and forth. And then you add in the trying to strike a chord and the you're not a colleague and your homie's got a weird case. Why is he around?
Right. Right.
You know, and now it goes from winning a rap beef to you have now just given your main adversary over the last 15 years the greatest cultural moment that he could have possibly had. Yeah. I couldn't love this more as a Kendrick fan.
Drake gave Kendrick the green light to kill him. Like,
yeah.
And this is like really in the weeds, or not, like, it's not too in the weeds, but like one of my favorite parts on Euphoria when he was like, back to back, I like that record. I'm going to get back to that in a second. And then dropping Meet the Grams and Not Like Us back to back. Yeah. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Okay. He's on demon time right now. He's on demon time right now.
He lays it all out in that song. Like, it was damn near prophecy when you look at how things played out. He tells you exactly what Drake's angle is going to be, how it's not going to land, what he's going to say back when he goes there, and how effective that's going to be. There's hints all throughout Euphoria as to what was coming with Meet the Grams and Not Like Us. And it's just going back now, like I said, and just playing these tracks over and over, especially when you listen to them in sequence. It just makes you wonder, like, did Drake really have any idea what he was stepping into with this dude? And if you didn't, I don't know why you would fight this battle. Everybody else, all the Future and Metro Boomin and Rick Ross and A$AP Rocky and Weeknd stuff, I think all that stuff was great from Drake. But with this one particular opponent, when you actually look at what's being leveled against one another, outside of the biggest allegations, it's like, dude, this isn't even close from a rapping perspective. Yeah. And musically, this dude dance just circles around you stylistically.
Yeah. And then you just get the culmination, which I thought was amazing last week, of the Ken and Friends concert in LA at the Forum, where it just, I don't know if like beautiful is the right word, but like the way that it all came together, and really for me, it was like jumping into a time machine for my, late teens, early 20s. Dude, I got chills when I saw Black Hippie up there, honestly. I was like, oh man, these were the guys. These were the guys. And not only that, you get YG, you get Tyler, the Creator, and obviously this is an LA thing, but I think you just get to see like the fact that Kendrick can do something like this, can pull something like all these people together. And at the end, after they played Not Like Us for the 5th time, you got people from 11,000 different gangs up there on the stage, and they're all posing and taking pictures together. That speaks to the cultural relevance and reverence that he has and that people have for him. So I cannot wait to see the Not Like Us music video. I thought the Ken and Friends thing was amazing. I watched all, the entire set that he had at the end, all hour and a half of it. The crowd was rapping Euphoria word for word, which is a 6.5 minute song. I mean,
that is sick.
I don't remember someone really winning a rap battle like this emphatically, because even like Drake versus Meek Mill was not this, and Pusha T is not as big as Kendrick is. So the fact that you have all your bases covered, like we got the music, we got the notoriety, we got the money. You can't really puncture any holes in this, and now he used it to bring everyone together for this moment, which is just, it's kind of crazy. Like, you brought together the country with this song.
Yes.
And it's just
okay. So let me ask you this:
it's just hating on Drake. It's so funny.
So here's the thing that I really wanted to ask, because I'm a San Diego native and I've been back and forth to LA basically throughout this whole exchange. Like there's a baked in bias for us on this side of the country. I don't know if I've heard much Drake outside at all. That was not like part of a DJ's playlist to kind of loop back around to like that or not like us. Like, I don't know how much Drake I've really heard stepping outside on weekends. And if I do, it's really brief, or it's like, it's one of those undeniable hit records like A God's Plan or In My Feelings, where nobody is bothered by hearing that. You don't hear the Drake and Sexy Red the way that you did maybe 3 or 4 months ago. It's so quiet over there, which lends just that much more credence to the idea that maybe people don't look at this dude the same for a little while.
Yeah. And I don't think that they will. I think it's like, to say his career is over is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's overstated for sure.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I think you don't just fall into nothing from that level of fame, but it's going to be different for him for a while. I wonder like what the collab situation is looking like. If it's just going to be like him getting up with a bunch of guys who are trying to get put on for the first time because like the established people see him as radioactive. But this actually did some damage in a way that I did not foresee coming into this, because when it started, I was like, these guys are both so big. This is just fun little back and forth. And then no, this has turned something that it's a setback for Drake. But for other rappers, it would probably kill their whole career. So at least he could still stand up.
I mean, yeah, the dude can be a pop star forever, right? Like that's the benefit of the position he was in coming into it, is that side of his career is cemented. He's going to be a Billboard darling probably for the rest of his career. He could probably do this into his 50s and still be making, top 10 records, if not number ones. But on this side, the hip hop specific side of this, I think he's affected in this way because we've never really had a moment that so emphatically felt like the stakes were for who is the king of this genre, and where it's not debatable to this degree. Jay-Z and Nas still left you. There was enough still happening in the late 90s to early 2000s around hip hop as a culture to where you could have that debate, but still kind of go back to whatever you're listening to regionally. If you're in the South, yeah, you can talk Jay-Z and Nas, but I'm going to get back to this crunk era stuff. I'm going to get back to my A-Ball and MJG. I'm going to get back to my 3-6 stuff. I'm going to get back to my Houston rap. There's so much just energy built from the Control moment up to now, especially because we haven't had many high profile rappers that have come out in the last half decade to kind of snatch some of the airspace away from Drake and some of his contemporaries, where by the time we got to that weekend, that Cinco de Mayo weekend, it was clear like, all the stakes are on this. Every song that drops feels like it's changing the conversation for each of these guys' legacy. And in a way that I just would have never predicted, even though I thought Kendrick would win, I never thought that we'll walk away from this saying like, oh, when we have the documentary 20 years from now about this moment, the people are going to be saying hip hop was changed, based on this back and forth. How we feel about each of these guys' careers has changed. I've already been on the Drake has been mid since Scorpion train, but it puts all of the Her Loss and Honestly Nevermind and For All the Dogs and all these albums into a much different space now, where it's like, that's a version of that dude's career that I can't even interface with because I can't hear that and not hear everything that Kendrick was saying about him, everything that Ross was saying about him, the fallout with Future. Like, it makes all of that look different now.
Yeah, I will say, like, moving beyond this, like just a specific beef, it did make me kind of realize, like, dude, where are the younger rappers who are just trying to come and take everything? Like, because that was still a thing when we were growing up, right? Kendrick, Drake, J. Cole, like, it was clear they wanted to be known as like the best rapper alive. But I feel like, dude, these guys are almost 40.
Right.
And
they're supposed to be getting the boot out of this thing.
Right. And they're still at the top. Like Gen Z, Gen Alpha, come
where
on.
you at?
We're here. We're waiting for you.
I don't even know if there is a short list of people who you would even say are working towards that right now. I just don't. And I don't know what that says about the genre. I don't know what that says about the genre. I think that I think it's easy as a fan, and I've made this mistake before of just saying like, oh man, hip hop's so young, it's just gonna last like this in perpetuity. There's always gonna be some next lyricist. Man, you look now at just how pop centric this genre has become. I would say really since like the onset of the pandemic, it's hard for me to look at this and not wonder whether or not the next iteration of black music, for lack of a better term, is changing. Like we might not look at hip hop as a separate entity. I think it is being kind of woven into the EDM world, the pop world. What's happening? Like you being in you being in New York, I'm sure you can speak to how drill has branched out into all these different things now. It's not just a genre; it's an entire vibe and expression of music now with your Cash Cobains and Ice Spice and all these people who would not have been typical drill 10 years ago when it was first getting introduced. I just don't know where that leaves the genre, which just makes this be, again, it just keeps coming back to this beef is this might be the only opportunity, the last opportunity maybe that we get to see something happen like this on this scale. And the genre just might not be what it was when we were growing up, maybe ever again.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. It's kind of sad, but
yeah.
Hey, we got this moment, and I'm glad I got to talk about it with you. Before we get out of here, plug your stuff. Let people know where you're working at.
On Twitter at Diante Lee FB, working for Spotify. I've been on the Ringer NFL show the last few weeks. I'm sure the cadence of that will probably keep increasing as we get closer to the NFL season. We're still carving out what the content on site's going to look like, but you guys know I'm always writing about ball, so you can find me on Twitter. I'll always post my links there, and we'll be podcasting with guys like Charles and the rest of the gang over at the Ringer and Spotify as we go forward, man. Just glad to be back at a spot talking ball full time the way that I like to.
Let's go. Love to hear it. It's going to do it for this episode of the Exempt List. I'm Charles McDonald. You can find me on Twitter at 4verts. Diante Lee is on Twitter at Diante Lee FB. Thanks to Andrew Hartz for helping us out behind the glass today, and we will see you next Tuesday.